To say is, on the morning of August 6, 2011, Billy and I woke to the realization of how gut-wrenchingly painful the cost of freedom truly is. We thought we understood. Aaron had deployed to Afghanistan time and time again. He deployed to Iraq. He was gone all the time. If you don't know, Navy SEALs, and especially when they get to the level of SEAL Team 6, that elite tip of the spear, they're never home. I remember one year when he told us that he had slept on his own pillow in his own bed less than 10 times that entire year. So this is the life that they live, and he was always in danger. But Billy and I always thought, come home. It's just something I guess you have to do in your mind. So on that morning, when we got that phone call that that helicopter had been shot down and there were no survivors, and our son, in fact, was one of the men on it, it altered our life unimaginably. And of course, it's never been the same. And it set a course. The death of our son did not set the course that brought us here tonight. But the platform that he left demanded that we be here tonight, because here's what we found out. After the shoot down of Extortion 17, the families were brought in for a debriefing to tell us what happened, because it was the single largest loss of life in the history of Naval Special Warfare, the single largest one-day loss of life in the now almost 14 years of war on terror. So it was a big deal. At the debriefing, we were told some things that didn't really make sense, and we left there with just a couple questions. And as we began to seek answers to those, what we thought were simple questions, every time we were given an answer, it conflicted with the answer we'd been given before. And so it raised suspicion in our mind. And I'm not going to follow down that track, because we do have the books available that will tell you everything we uncovered. I'm just trying to explain how we ended up here tonight. Because what we learned is that our war fighters, this next greatest generation, in my opinion, and I'll explain why in a minute, they're being sacrificed on the battlefield. And America is completely unaware of what's going on, as we were, even though we had a son fighting that war. He would come home and tell us how bad it was. But of course, I guess just something in your mind as a mom doesn't want to embrace that thought, because you don't want to live under that type of fear. But the truth was, we found out that in 2009, and this is not a political agenda at all. Please don't take it this way. This is not about right or left or Democrat or Republican. This is an American issue, what's happening to our war fighters, and I want to address it like that. Because here's what happened when Barack Obama became president. In March of 2009, he and senior military leaders implemented what's called the coin strategy in Afghanistan. And that coin strategy is better known as winning the hearts and minds. And Billy and I are firm believers that you cannot win the hearts and minds of an Islamic jihadist, period. And so the problem begins right there with the whole concept. But what happened is, we found out that in the first 7.5 years of war in Afghanistan, we lost 630 U.S. soldiers on the battlefield. In the next 3.5 years, we lost 1,544. After we changed the strategy, and no one was talking about it. We also learned that in the first 7.5 years of war in Afghanistan, we had 2,638 U.S. soldiers come home wounded, maimed, forever changed. It's a huge number. But unfortunately, what we found out is in the next 3.5 years, under the coin strategy, the winning hearts and minds, where we allowed the Afghan terrorists to become an ally and close our eyes to the threat that posed our American soldiers. In the next 3.5 years, the wounded in action numbers were 15,036. And it woke us up. That information got Billy and I off the couch. And that information, that sacrifice that so many had made on our behalf, demanded that we begin to fight culturally the battle that they are fighting kinetically, that we begin to become engaged. And so that's why we're here tonight. And you know, I want to tell you that, you know, there is a battle going on in our nation. And I want to go back really fast and point out why I said this battle is being fought by what I believe to be the next greatest generation. Is because in this almost 14 years of war on terror, less than 1/2 of 1% of our nation has served at any given time. This is the longest war in America's history, and yet we have not had to enact a draft. So while we look around at this next generation, we call them the millennials, and some a little older than that are fighting this war. But while we look at them, let's remember that those brave sons and daughters who watched 9/11 when they were teenagers, as Aaron did, and said, not in my generation. America won't be destroyed in my generation. Those sons and daughters rose up, and they have defended this nation for almost 14 years at great cost. Over 50,000 now have come home wounded in action, and almost 7,000 homes like ours have lost a son or daughter, which means there's husbands, wives, children, as our son you saw had a wife and 2 beautiful baby children. But before I hand the microphone to Billy, I just want to tell you just a couple little things about our son Aaron, because it's the most important thing I can ever tell you, and that's this. Aaron Vaughn loved Christ with an exquisite love. Never a day, from the time he was a child, he gave his heart to Christ as a very young boy. And from the time he was a little boy, he would tell anybody who cared to listen that one day he was going to be a Navy SEAL, that's what God had created him to be. And you saw the picture of him where he's all, muscled up. You know how funny that is that he said that. But the truth is, God had created Aaron to be a warrior. Aaron didn't become a warrior after he became a Navy SEAL. Aaron became a Navy SEAL because God had created a warrior. And Aaron always knew it. The rest of us couldn't see it, but that boy could always see it. Overcame unimaginable odds to achieve that dream. In high school, he obliterated the ACL in his left knee during a football practice just before his senior season began. He had surgery, had that repaired, replaced, ACL, you may be familiar with that, and worked so hard to regain his strength that he, at 6'4" tall, within about 4 months was running a 4.40. He was an aggressive, strong, passionate man because he had a goal. He had a goal to go fight for his country. And see, what happened is, just before school let out that year, he was 17 years old when he graduated, just before school let out that year, he was playing a pickup game of basketball with some friends, and he blew that knee out again. And he couldn't believe it. It was devastating, but he had that warrior mentality. He thought, I know I can do this. I can go get it replaced again. I can get right back in this fight, and I can go into the SEAL Challenge program. But unfortunately, about 2 hours into the surgery, his surgeon, who was a pro, came out and said, Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, I have bad news. There was nothing I could do to fix Aaron's knee. He's going to spend the rest of his life somewhat physically handicapped, and he'll never be able to do anything athletic again. Don't you just love how God must laugh at our words that we say sometimes? Because then came, and Aaron resigned himself to that. He went to college, thought his dream was over. It was a crushing blow. But, he went and got his life in order, went to college, got a fantastic job, was making good money, had a great future in front of him. And then came that day that changed everything for all of us in this room and frankly across the globe, and that was September 11th, 2001. And as our family sat and watched those towers fall and watched that plane strike our Pentagon and heard the stories about those 40 incredible Americans on Flight 93 standing up and taking their place in history to defend this nation from what possibly would have been the most devastating blow that terrible morning, Aaron Vaughn was inspired a few months later. He came home on his 21st birthday, and he said, just like he was saying, I stopped and got an ice cream cone on the way home from work. He said, Mom and Dad, I stopped at the Navy recruiter's office on the way home from work, and I joined the SEAL Challenge program. And Billy Vaughn, being the encourager in the family, he said, well, son, you'll never make it, And Aaron said, I'll make it, Dad. I've always known this is what I'm supposed to do. And we were both just kind of dumbstruck by this idea that he had that he could do this with no left knee. And so me being the mom, how we are, I said, well, son, does the Navy know about your knee? And he said, well, of course not, or they'd have never let me in. So I'm gonna cut straight to the end of this story. You already know what it is, but you may not know how impressive what God accomplished through that boy is. Bud's class 248 started with 157 men, and 7 finished. And Aaron Vaughn was one of them. Not only that, there is a wall in Coronado Island where the Bud's compound is, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. And across the top of it, it says, first time, every time. Aaron Vaughn's name is on that wall, one of the few men in history who completed every single evolution required of him the first time he tried it. And I do not say that to brag on Aaron, because Aaron was the most humble human being you would ever meet. He was just honored that he got to serve his nation, that he got to take his place in history and do what he'd been created to do. He always told me, every time we'd have a late night talk, which was our thing, he'd always bring it up. I can't believe God let me do this. You know what? He was completely willing to die for his nation should that come. But it shouldn't have come the way it did. And Billy and I will tell you that, and there's so much more to tell. And we're going to be coming back over to Naples. And that's one of the reasons we're collecting your information on the little cards, so we can send you an email notification when we have, an evening to spend together and talk about what our family has experienced and what we've learned. But what we learned is, like you read in the introduction, it was a needless waste of American life by a reckless government that we must, as citizens, take responsibility for and get under control. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Billy.
As Karen said, thank you all very much for coming to listen to what we have to say. I'm always amazed when people allow Karen and I, especially me, redneck from Tennessee, to stand up and talk before people. We never planned on doing what we're doing today. Let me tell you, our founders believed that certain rights were given to mankind, not by government, not by man, but by God Almighty. And among those, the right to liberty, the right to life, and the pursuit of happiness. Our founders knew those rights to come from God. But just because our founders believed that, and just because we believe that, does not mean those rights will always be exercisable. And, it's easy for us to think, because those were our founders, that those rights belong solely to Americans, if we don't watch it. Those rights belong to every man and woman, boy and girl that God created. But if you look around this globe, where are those rights being allowed? Where are they exercisable today? We can sit here in y'all's house of worship tonight, and we don't have to worry about armed men coming in with AK-47s and killing the men and seizing the women and our children and doing unspeakable things. We don't have to worry about that in the United States of America tonight. And it's not because we're better. It's not because God loves us more than He loves others. It's because our nation was founded in Judeo-Christian principles. It's because we're not perfect, but God is forgiving. It's because that men and women in this country and in this republic love God Almighty, and it's because great sacrifices have been paid in the name of freedom. Over 1.3 million Americans have given their life's last blood, their last measure, so that you and I and our children and our grandchildren could enjoy these freedoms and these rights. And folks, they've given, but it's up to us, the American citizen, to protect those rights here at home. They can defend us abroad, but they cannot defend us here at home if we let the rights that my son and many of you have sacrificed for, and maybe know those who have sacrificed for, if we allow those rights to wither away by being complacent here at home. See, there is evil out there, and as Karen said, much evil, unimaginable evil, and we're being protected and even hidden from it today if we don't go seeking the truth. And as Karen said, Aaron was a believer. We're a believing family. And Aaron knew, he saw it black and white, the enemy that faces our republic and Western civilization today. And it is a slow advancing enemy, and it has advanced for a long time. But they are patient, and they don't intend to defeat this republic or Western civilization by destroying our tanks and our airplanes. as they have said they will do it, by our defeat at our own miserable hand, by destroying our will. Our warriors have the will. They have the training. But I'm afraid our leaders do not. Political decisions are getting our defenders killed. And the thing about our defenders, they can't speak for themselves. If Aaron were alive, Karen and I would not be standing before you tonight. Many have said to us, please keep speaking. Let me tell you, on May 1st, 2011, the United States of America took out Osama bin Laden. And in an unprecedented breach of national security, Vice President Joe Biden stepped to the microphone and identified the Navy SEALs as having carried out the attack on bin Laden. And later the administration identified that it was indeed Navy SEAL Team 6. And a target was not put only on the backs of SEAL Team 6 in Afghanistan, but all those, as you saw on the chopper, who worked with SEAL Team 6. Less than 2 days after that, Aaron called his mom and said, Mom, you have to shut down your social media. Mom, you have to get everything off about me, about you. Mom, there's chatter. Our lives are in danger. Mom, the family's life is in danger. And Mom, even your life. Well, we know it wasn't just Aaron, because then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates came out on TV and said, we had said that the details of the raid would never come out. But that all fell apart on Monday morning. And then later footage of Secretary Gates speaking to special operations units at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and addressing their concerns because they had been outed by their commander-in-chief and his administration. By May the 10th of 2011, in the military testimony, military information that Karen and I have, it stated that Taliban with heavy weapons were moving in large numbers into the Tangi River Valley with the express intention of taking down a NATO chopper. It was all over the internet by the Taliban that they were going to get even with Navy SEAL Team 6. Some 93 days after we took out Osama bin Laden, Naval Special Warfare suffered the greatest loss in their history, and the largest, as Karen said, I'm repeating it, largest one-day loss in our now 13, 14-year-old war on terror. I was in British Columbia, going on a ferry to Vancouver that morning when I got the word that Aaron had died. And Tara called me and she said, Daddy, she hadn't called me Daddy in years. She's married, got a family of her own. And, our kids already been Dad, Dad, Dad. She called, she said 3 words. Daddy, he's dead, as she was crying. I'd never heard anything like that before, and I couldn't respond except to say, okay, baby, I'll call you back. And I did in a few minutes, but I want to tell you this. One of the first things that came to my mind immediately, because I was alone, nobody there, I knew no one there, and I said it out loud. God, you always knew, didn't you? And it was a comfort, believe me, in that time. And it has been to our family since, because the God that our son served and that we serve and that you serve is not shocked by the way things are or by the way that or by anything that happens. He is sovereign. And we know and we knew that this most awful thing that had ever come into our life had to pass by the throne of Almighty God for it to happen. In September of that year, I went into Navy SEAL Team 6 to the base there, and I talked to the commander there, Captain Howard, and I said, we had found out quickly that they were on a National Guard helicopter. And it didn't sound right. Aaron had been a SEAL for years and years. I knew how they fly. I knew they flew with the 160th, the Night Stalkers, the Special Operations, but they were on a National Guard helicopter. National Guardsmen killed, Air Force Special Operations, as you saw, and Navy SEALs and SEAL Team Support. When I went in, I said, "Sir, is it true they were on a CH-47? Because the CH-47 is not an assault chopper." He said, "Billy, it is true." And I said, "Sir, would the results have been the same?" He said, "This is what I can tell you, Billy. If the RPG had hit the chopper like it hit that one, the results would have been the same. This is what we'll never know, Billy, is would it have hit it at all? Because if it had been a special operations chopper, it would have gone in fast and hot. Special operations flight crew, and at a different angle, so we'll never know. By October of that year, the families were brought into Little Creek, Virginia, to a debriefing where we were told what took place that night. And what we were told is that the Rangers had gone out on an operation called Operation Lefty Grove to retrieve or capture or kill a high-value target, Kari Tahir, a Taliban, probably a Pakistani Taliban. And when they went out that night, he evaded the Rangers, and the SEALs went in as a quick reactionary force. They were called in as a quick reactionary force. And again, we were told they were on a CH-47. And I asked the question to Brigadier General Colt, why were they on a CH-47? And he said, because we don't have enough MH-47 special operations choppers. And we would find out, indeed we don't, in the military report that I'll share with you in just a second, that we began to look at a later date because of the stepped-up missions in Afghanistan. The second thing that we found out that was very disturbing that day is that as that chopper went in, we had in the air an AC-130 Spectre gunship and two AH-64 Apache helicopters. The most lethal air weapons team this world has ever seen. Able to take out any enemy. But when the chopper was shot down, they sat helplessly, even though two of those aircraft saw where the RPGs came from, they sat helplessly and watched the men unload the equipment and climb down from a tower and walk away. The men who caused the greatest loss in the history of naval special warfare walked away that night. Why? Because it was described to the families, because of the rules of engagement, there might be friendlies below the tower that the shots were fired from. So our men were not allowed, our air crews were not allowed to take them out. I left there with those two disturbing questions and began to call congressmen. And in time, I talked to Congressman Tom Rooney, and about November of 2011, his staff contacted me and said, Congressman Rooney is going to a classified meeting with high-ranking military officials in D.C. to get answers to your questions. Those two questions. I have a handwritten letter from Congressman Rooney today. A copy of it's in the book. He did not address why they were on the wrong airframe. But what he said together was it was not because of the rules of engagement. He was told in the classified meeting. It was because they didn't know where the shots came from. I knew that was a lie. We'd been told, in fact, I called a couple of the other families. I said, is this not what we were told? Yeah, that's what we were told. I knew it was a lie because I'd been told that 3 times. Once from the general, as he told the whole crowd, and twice later from a JAG, a Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Grant, who told the story again. I didn't know what to do. I let the letter lay there for a couple weeks until after the first of the year. And all of a sudden it dawned on me one day, call Colonel Grant, Lieutenant Colonel Grant. I had his number. And without telling him what the congressman had been told, I asked him again what happened. And he went into even more detail this time, the same story. I hung up the phone and I called the Admiral over Naval Special Warfare, Admiral Sean Pybus, and told him what the congressman had been told. He was at the debriefing that day. I said, Admiral, why would somebody tell the congressman that? He said, Billy, I don't know. You heard the same thing I did. Well, in the next day or two, I remembered that when we had left there that day, we'd been given a folder, an overview of what took place. Inside that folder was a disk. I put the disk in the computer. We were also told that day, one of the fathers sitting right next to Karen spoke up and asked, why was a drone strike used that night? And folks, I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't have. I'm not a military expert, just a father who's lost his son. But the answer came from a 3-star admiral sitting right in front of us who turned to the grieving parents and spouses and said, I will never forget these words, because we want to win their hearts and minds. Aaron Vaughn did not become a Navy SEAL to win hearts and minds of a savage enemy, and nor do our other warriors. We have a very unique of warriors for the most part because our warriors march off to battle volunteer and march off to battle because they love what's behind them more than they hate what is in front of them. And that was the case with Aaron. He loved this republic so much. But those words have stuck with us, and we've heard it over and over again. I looked at that disc. The information was overwhelming. I printed it out. It was some 1,350 pages. Much of it redacted. Another 250 pages totally redacted. But what I learned very quickly, early on, let me know why we're losing war. And by the way, Extortion 17 is just a symptom that came to the top in a large number of a much bigger problem in our military and in this republic today. I learned very quickly. When Aaron came home in 2010, one day we were talking from Afghanistan. They were working with the Afghans then in the same way, taking them on the ops with them. He said, "Dad, we don't tell them where we're going until we get there." Talking about the Afghans flying on the choppers with them. But he said, because a lot of times the enemy will know when we get there. And Dad, a lot of times they won't fight with us when we get there because they know the enemy. And Dad, they're always loyal to the highest bidder. Fast forward to 2011 as I begin to read this report. By then, we, as the military leaders in Afghanistan, testified to Brigadier Colt and his staff. They said, we operate with the OCG, the Operational Coordination Group of Afghanistan. It's comprised of the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, and the Afghan Security Minister. And by the way, you could be sitting there, and I completely understand, saying, why are you telling this story? Because the war in Afghanistan is over. Our Commander-in-Chief has announced that. But we still have 10,000 American warriors in Afghanistan, as Karen told you. And folks, let me just say something else quickly. Our world, the Middle East, looks much like Europe looked when Prime Minister Chamberlain was the leader of Great Britain. This world that has been somewhat quiet most of my lifetime is on fire. And I will tell you nothing but the facts because our son's honor depends on it. He built this platform that Karen and I speak on with his sacrifice. But let me just say this. This president has said, like 2 months ago, we will use our successful strategy in Yemen as a model to battle ISIS. Well, let's look back at the successful strategy that's come out in the news the last couple days about Yemen. But I've got to quickly finish here. We operate with that group, the Operational Coordination Group of Afghanistan. They have eyes on every special operations mission that takes place. They have the authority to squash that mission. They have the intel of that mission. They sit in a cubicle next to our intelligence people, our tactical operations center people. They have the radio, the monitors, and all of it. But what they do not have is any oversight from the U.S. government and or from the administration due to a special agreement between the Obama administration and then President Karzai. In theory, folks, we have lent our special operations forces out to the Islamic Republic, Sharia-compliant government of Afghanistan. I believe this is criminal. I believe this is criminal. In fact, Karen and I have in our possession an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, a legal document signed by then General John Allen and the Defense Minister of Afghanistan that the very title is the Afghanization of U.S. Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan. And the next 4 pages will tell you how our U.S. forces are supposed to become compliant and more like the Afghanis to get along in that culture. That's not who our American warriors volunteered to be. I saw that. I couldn't believe it. In the next few pages, I saw that the 8 Afghans who were with them that night, 7 commandos and 1 interpreter, were not the same men who were listed on the flight manifest. Well, I told Karen, I screamed, I said, you got to come here. You're not going to believe this. But as I read the rest of it, nothing else was mentioned in the whole 1,300 pages about those 7 Afghans. In January of 2013, Four-Star Admiral William McCraven came to our home. And with him, he brought 2 security who stayed outside and a Delta Force operator, a senior enlisted advisor. And I brought that up as we talked. And I said it must not have been a very big deal. It wasn't mentioned in the other 1,300 pages. And Admiral McCraven sat and never said a word. But his advisor said, Mr. Vaughn, it was a very big deal. That should have never happened. In fact, Mr. Vaughn, you need to know that the rest of your son's team was very upset because an Afghan commander was allowed to speak at the ramp ceremony in Afghanistan. And Mr. Vaughn, those men were swapped out at the last moment by a commander. Well, I cannot believe sometimes the way I react, because the problem was I didn't react. I didn't think to ask, who was the commander? But some 2 weeks later, I had to find out, if I could, who that commander was. So once again, I called Lieutenant Colonel Grant, now Colonel Grant, at SOCOM, and told him what this was a man who was involved in the investigation and on the staff. And I said, Colonel Grant, I told him the story I've just told you. I said, Colonel Grant, who was that commander? He said, Mr. Vaughn, I'm very puzzled. We weren't even told about that happening. And he said, I can't believe any American commander or your son's team would have swapped out those Afghans because they work with them all the time. We don't have an answer to that yet today. As the chopper went in, and I have to close right now, but as the chopper went in that night, and I told you they didn't take something that we've learned since the book came out, you will see in the book that the AC-130 crew testified. We didn't think it was a good idea to bring a chopper in because we'd had a 3.5-hour operation underway. But one thing I have learned since then, this past year, two people from the air weapons team contacted us and talked to us and met with us privately. One person told us, we were told before the engines were cool on our aircraft to never speak to the families about what went on that night. One person told us, and in their first email to us, they bought the book, had no idea who we were, but through the book were able to contact us and said, I've laid awake at night for nearly 3 years wanting to murder someone who sent those SEALs in that night. The people who protect us were murdered. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I'm on medicine. I'm seeing a psychologist, and I have told my psychologist I'd rather spend the rest of my life in Fort Leavenworth than be silent about what's going on and what happened that night and what's going on in the military. We've had many come to us and tell us things. We've had many come and say, don't stop speaking. What I must tell you today, and I think I've already said it. See, Karen and I didn't know. We weren't really informed. We have to inform ourselves about what's going on with our military. All the other things that are wrong in our republic, if we lose our military, we've lost it all, folks. And it's not good. We, the American citizens, we must stand and defend those who defend us. On September 11, 2001, bureaucratic government was not able to defend our republic against 3 Islamic jihadist attacks. But a 4th attack launched by the jihadists was thwarted by American citizens on Flight 93 who gave it all for this republic. If this republic is to be saved today, by God's grace, it will not be through our bureaucratic government. It will be through American citizens just like you. Thank y'all very much.